I've been lurking on this subreddit for years, reading other people's confessions like they were bedtime stories, telling myself I was different, that my mistakes were contextual, complicated, necessary, even. But lately I've had this itch I can't scratch, this need to put something down in words before it rots a hole straight through my chest. So, here it is. One of mine. Not the worst thing I've ever done, but definitely one of the most educational. For context, I wasn't always that guy. I didn't grow up dreaming about crime. I grew up watching my parents drown in bills, watching smart people lose to dumb systems, watching honesty get rewarded with nothing but more work. By my late 20s, I was working in a financial services company that loved to preach transparency while quietly bending rules in the back office. I noticed patterns, gaps, things that didn't quite line up but also didn't trigger alarms. At first, I told myself I was just curious. Then I told myself I deserved more than a paycheck that barely covered rent. The crime I'm talking about happened during a period when I felt invisible and underpaid, but dangerously competent. I understood systems better than most people around me. I knew how reports were generated, how accounts were reviewed, how managers skimmed instead of read. The idea that kept circling my brain was simple and seductive. And if everything looks perfect on paper, nobody asks questions. And if nobody asks questions, money can quietly become something else. My motive wasn't pure greed at first. It started as resentment. Then it turned into curiosity. Then it became a test of whether I could actually pull something off without the whole house collapsing. I told myself I'd try it once. Proof of concept. That lie became very important later. I didn't wake up one morning and decide, today I become a criminal. It felt more like a slow drift. 1,000 tiny compromises stacking on top of each other until the edge was suddenly beneath my feet. Looking back, the scariest part isn't that I crossed the line, it's how calm I felt while approaching it. This story is about the first time I used shell companies to move dirty money and make it look like it had been bathed, dressed, and tucked into bed with a glass of warm milk. The reports looked too clean. That should have scared me more than it did. If you're expecting some mastermind origin story, you're going to be disappointed. I wasn't a genius. I was a bored guy with access, a decent brain, and a growing lack of conscience. That combination is more common than people like to admit. The shift from interesting idea to actual plan didn't happen all at once. It crept in through daydreams during pointless meetings and long walks home where I replayed processes in my head like someone studying game footage. I knew how client accounts were opened. I knew what documentation was required. I knew which compliance checks were automated and which ones were basically ceremonial. I started small, and I mean embarrassingly small. I created a spreadsheet at home that mirrored our company's internal format. Same column headers, same naming conventions, same boring gray color scheme. At first, I just played with numbers, hypotheticals. If X moves here, then Y can appear there. If a company invoices another company for consulting services, nobody blinks. Consulting is the financial equivalent of miscellaneous. You can hide a body in that word. I spent weeks researching shell companies, but not in the way people imagine. No dark web, no sketchy forums, mostly boring business blogs, legal articles, and government registry websites. Turns out, forming an LLC in certain jurisdictions is easier than ordering takeout. A few forms, a small fee, a registered agent service that promised privacy, boom, you're a business owner. The first one I created was under a painfully generic name, something like North Shore Consulting Group. It sounded fake because real companies often do. I paid extra for an address service that provided mail scanning and forwarding. I set up a business bank account using documentation that was technically legitimate, even if the intent behind it wasn't. Every night, I rehearsed the flow in my head. Money enters Company A. Company A pays Company B for services. Company B pays Company C for subcontracting. Company C moves funds into an account I control. By the time it reaches me, it looks like earnings. Boring, taxable, clean. The real trick wasn't creating the companies, it was embedding them into an existing ecosystem so they didn't look lonely. Lone entities attract attention. Networks feel normal. So, I created 3 shell companies instead of 1. I also began quietly observing who approved what at work. Not in a creepy way, just attentively. I noticed that Janet in compliance trusted reports if totals balanced. She didn't care about narrative. I noticed my manager skimmed dashboards but never drilled into raw transaction logs. I noticed audits focused on outliers, not consistency. Consistency was my future best friend. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself that planning didn't mean I was committed, but I also saved all my notes in an encrypted folder and started using a separate laptop I bought with cash. That's the moment I should have walked away. Instead, I labeled the folder Project N. I didn't even bother pretending it stood for something noble. Once I had the skeleton of the plan, I forced myself to slow down. Rushing is how people get caught. I gave myself a rule. Nothing moves until it feels boring. I spent another month just watching transactions at work. Who sent money, where, how often, and in what sizes. Patterns mattered more than amounts. Huge transfers triggered reviews. Medium. Predictable ones blended in. I adjusted my shells to look alive. Tiny inbound payments from freelance platforms. Small outgoing payments labeled software, hosting, marketing. I even paid a few real contractors to design logos and basic websites, just so the companies could exist online. North Shore Consulting had a homepage that said absolutely nothing. Mission statements, buzzwords, stock photos of people shaking hands. Perfect. Then I picked a target pool of funds. Accounts already known for heavy activity and complex routing. Noise covers footsteps. I rehearsed the first move at least 50 times. Not physically. In my head. Visualizing clicks. Menu paths. Field entries. Error messages. The first transfer was going to be tiny. Small enough to be invisible. Large enough to prove the system worked. The night before, I barely slept. Not from fear exactly. More like standing backstage before a show you never meant to perform in. I kept telling myself, one test. Then I decide. Deep down, I already knew I was lying. The first real move happened on a Tuesday afternoon, which somehow made it feel worse. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just fluorescent lights and stale coffee. I created a fake consulting invoice from North Shore to one of the high-traffic client accounts. Nothing flashy. Process optimization services. $10,000. Pocket change in that ecosystem. My hands shook when I attached the document. I routed it through the same internal channels as dozens of legitimate invoices. No shortcuts. No special treatment. I forced myself to follow policy like a model employee. Then I waited. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 30 minutes. Still nothing. When the approval notification finally popped up, my stomach dropped like I just missed a step on a staircase. The money moved. Just like that. No alarms, no emails, no phone calls. I stared at the confirmation screen longer than necessary, half expecting it to evaporate. It didn't. I didn't move it to the next shell right away. I let it sit overnight, terrified that delaying would somehow make things worse, but even more terrified to touch it again. That night, I realized something important. The system wasn't fragile. It was asleep, and I was standing inside it. Once I saw the money survive its first night, something in me shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it dulled, like a toothache you learn to live with. The next day, I pushed the second step. North Shore paid Company B, same amount, new invoice. Subcontracted analysis. Again, nothing happened. By Friday, the money sat in Company C's account. I logged in and just stared. Seeing it there felt different than seeing numbers move inside work systems. This was external, real, mine. I didn't touch it for another week. Not because I was noble, because I was scared that moving it to my personal account would snap some invisible tripwire. During that week, I became hyper aware of everything. Every email felt loaded. Every meeting sounded like it might secretly be about me. Nobody cared. People complained about printers, about deadlines, about lunch options. Meanwhile, I was quietly sitting on stolen money. The silence was the loudest part. That's when I understood the most dangerous lesson so far. If nothing goes wrong, your brain starts calling it normal. And normal is addictive. The first time I finally transferred money to myself, I used a brand new personal account at a different bank. I told myself I'd only take half, $5,000. I labeled it owner distribution. When the transaction cleared, I felt a rush so strong it made me lightheaded. Not joy exactly, power. Like I had discovered a hidden cheat code in real life. I didn't spend it right away. I kept checking the balance, almost compulsively, as if it might disappear if I stopped looking. After 3 days of nothing happening, I bought groceries without checking prices. That sounds stupid, but it felt huge. Then I paid off a credit card. No fireworks. No knock on the door, just relief. That relief didn't make me want to stop, it made me want to scale. I increased the next invoice to $20,000, then $30,000. Still nothing. I told myself I was building a buffer before quitting. That was another lie. I wasn't building an exit. I was building a lifestyle. Scaling changed the tone of everything. Small theft feels like mischief. Bigger theft feels like engineering. I started staggering transfers across different days and different shells, so no single path carried too much weight. I adjusted descriptions constantly. Strategic advisory, workflow redesign, systems integration, corporate Mad Libs. I also began forging light paper trails, fake email threads saved as PDFs, fake contracts. Nothing too detailed, just enough to satisfy a lazy auditor. The scariest part? I got good at it. Not proud good, comfortable good. I could spot weak processes instantly. I could predict which transactions would sail through. At work, people started trusting me more. That irony wasn't lost on me. Every time someone said, "William's solid," I felt a quiet twist in my gut, but I kept going. By month 3, I had moved over $200,000. It didn't feel like real money anymore. It felt like points in a game. That's when I should have stopped. That's also when I felt untouchable. The first crack came from a place I didn't expect. Not compliance, not audits. Accounting. A junior accountant named Leo sent me a casual Slack message. "Hey, quick question about a vendor. North Shore Consulting. Do we have a master services agreement on file?" My heart slammed so hard I had to stand up. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing. Yeah, should be in the shared contracts folder. Might be under NSC instead of full name. Which was a gamble. I hadn't created a master agreement. I created one in 15 minutes. Backdated, signed with a fake signature, uploaded to the folder. Then I replied, "Found it." Looks like someone misfiled earlier. Leo responded with a thumbs up emoji. I went to the bathroom and dry heaved. That night, I barely slept. For the first time, I pictured handcuffs. Not abstract ones, cold ones. The fear didn't make me quit. It made me start planning contingencies, burn accounts, delete shells, plausible deniability. Once you start planning escapes, you're already deeper than you think. The first crack came from a place I didn't expect. Not compliance, not audits, accounting. A junior accountant named Leo messaged me. "Quick question, North Shore Consulting. Do we have a master services agreement on file?" My heart slammed. I told him it should be in the shared folder under NSC. There was no agreement. I made one in 15 minutes. Backdated, fake signature, uploaded it. Then I replied, "Found it." Must have been misfiled. Thumbs up emoji. I went to the bathroom and dry heaved. That night, I didn't sleep. For the first time, I pictured handcuffs. The fear didn't make me stop. It made me plan exits. Once you start planning exits, You're already trapped. After Leo, everything felt fragile. I slowed transfers way down, smaller amounts, longer gaps. On the surface, I looked calmer. Inside, I was constantly scanning for signs, tone changes, side glances, calendar invites that felt too vague. Nothing happened. Weeks passed, then months. The fear faded again. That cycle is dangerous. Scare, behave, relax, repeat. I told myself I'd siphon one last chunk and then dismantle everything. One last became 50,000, then another 50. I started moving money into a brokerage account, telling myself I was being responsible. Long-term thinking, right? At work, layoffs were announced. People panicked. I knew I had a secret safety net. That realization disgusted me. It also made me feel superior. Both feelings existed at the same time. That's when I noticed something worse than greed. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt entitled. The second crack was louder. An external audit, company-wide. The word alone changed the air. People cleaned desks, updated files, pretended to care about documentation. I joined in. I double-checked my fake contracts. I renamed folders. I deleted browsing histories. I created a kill switch spreadsheet listing every shell, account, and access point. If I had to vanish, this was my map. One afternoon, my manager asked, "Can you walk the auditors through vendor payment flows tomorrow?" I smiled and said, "Sure." I went home and seriously considered not coming back. Instead, I stayed up all night rehearsing lies. Not big lies. Small, boring ones. The best kind. I showed the auditors sanitized examples, legitimate vendors, normal transactions. They nodded. They thanked me. They left. I sat in my car afterward and shook for 10 straight minutes. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like I'd just stepped around a grave. After the audit passed, something inside me broke. Not in a dramatic way. More like a quiet collapse. I stopped escalating. I stopped creating new shells. I just maintained. Money kept trickling in. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to feel dirty every time I checked balances. I started drinking more. Not blackout. Just enough to turn the volume down in my head. Sometimes I imagine confessing. Not to police. To a stranger. Someone who didn't know me before this version. I avoided mirrors more than I used to. I didn't recognize the person who could calmly explain payment workflows while actively abusing them. The thrill was gone. The fear was dull. All that was left was weight. That's when I knew I couldn't do this forever. The question wasn't if I'd stop. It was whether I'd stop free. After the audit passed, something inside me sagged. Not relief. Exhaustion. I stopped expanding. No new shells, no bigger transfers, just maintenance. Money still came in, enough to live well, enough to feel sick about it. I drank more, slept worse. The thrill was gone. The fear was quiet. Only pressure remained. I knew I couldn't keep going. The real question became, do I quit clean or get caught? I chose to quit in the laziest way possible. I didn't confess. I didn't report anything. I just stopped touching the system. No more invoices. No more transfers. The shells sat dormant. Balances frozen in time. At work, I acted normal. Months passed. Nothing exploded. That silence felt suspicious, but also merciful. Eventually, I took a new job at another company. Different industry. Different systems. I told myself I was starting over. I left the shells alive, though. I didn't have the courage to dismantle them. I was afraid deleting things would draw more attention than leaving them untouched. So I walked away. Not clean. Not absolved. Just distant. Sometimes I log into the accounts and stare. I don't move the money. I don't feel proud. I feel haunted. Getting away with it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like being permanently unfinished. A year after I left, I got an email from a former coworker. Subject line, random question. My hands went cold. He just wanted a reference, that was it. I laughed after. Not because it was funny, because my body didn't know how else to release the tension. Since then, every unknown number still spikes my heart rate. Every knock sounds louder than it should. I live a quiet life now. Pay taxes, complain about groceries, pretend I'm normal. But I carry a private biography no one else knows. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because people imagine criminals as monsters. Most of the time, we're just people who didn't stop ourselves early enough. That's the part that scares me most. I've thought a lot about turning myself in, late at night, in the shower, on long drives. I imagine the relief of not hiding. Then I imagine prison, the looks from family, the permanent label, fear wins. So I stay silent. That choice adds another layer to the crime, not just what I did, but what I keep doing by not facing it. I try to balance the scale in small, meaningless ways. Donations, helping friends financially, being good. It doesn't erase anything. It just makes the weight slightly easier to carry. I don't think I deserve forgiveness. I'm not even sure I want it. I just don't want anyone else to become me. Which brings me to the last part. If you're reading this and flirting with the idea of just one small step, please understand something. The first step is the only one that feels optional. After that, everything becomes momentum. You don't wake up evil. You wake up compromised, then comfortable, then committed. Systems don't collapse because of supervillains. They collapse because ordinary people discover quiet loopholes and decide to keep walking through them. I got away with this. That's a fact, but I didn't escape it. I carry it into every calm moment, every success, every plan for the future. If you're stuck in a job where you feel invisible and exploited, I get it. If you feel smarter than the system, you might be right. None of that makes crossing the line harmless. My advice? Quit the job, burn out, start over, be broke, be embarrassed. Do anything except tell yourself you'll just try something small, because small doesn't stay small. And some stories don't end with sirens. They end with a person who has to live the rest of their life knowing exactly who they chose to become